Warren Harding. Yeah.
And where do you live?
I live at 151 Herring Pond Road, Buzzards Bay. And I've lived in this area all my life.
Could you tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up here in town?
To me and the rest of the people here was a very good life. A very poor life, money-wise, but a very good life. We raised our own food, vegetables, pigs, cows, etc., chickens. We lived more or less off the land. You know. Actually, it wasn't much different than it is today.
Except we had a lot of fun as kids.
Yeah, we did. Growing up, we had, in the winter, we had lots of ice. As kids, ice skating, played pickup ball. Not major league stuff, but Charlie knows.
Roller skating on Herring Pond Road was pretty smooth pavement then.
I was born on the night of the Tunney Depsy fight, which was quite an event back then. Boxing was a big thing. I was born in the bedroom of my home. My mother was in labor. The doctor, back in those days, the doctors made house calls, which they don't do today. And the doctor was in the kitchen with my father and friends, listening to the radio, to the fight. And they were all betting on who was going to win. My father was betting on Gene Tunney, and he happened to win. So I got the nickname Tunney when I was born, just about the time of the fight. And I've been called that all my life. Even the teachers in school called me Tunney. But school was a lot different then than it is now, really. Small classrooms, you knew your teachers very well, and it was no problem.
When were you born?
1926.
Could you tell me a little bit about your school experiences growing up in town?
School experiences? A lot of kids today don't enjoy school, but I really enjoyed it. I think mainly one of the reasons was because I had to work a lot at home. And in school, you have a lot of fun. We had, it was a small school, Sagamore Grammar School, and it took in 4 different villages. So you can see how small it was. And we played basketball. We never had a real football team, but we played baseball, basketball. Basketball was a big thing, and it was a lot of fun, really.
Was this at the Hoxie School?
It was the only school around here. It took in both sides of the canal, the south side and the north side. They were two different villages, really, you know.
How were you influenced by Wampanoag culture?
It was just a fact of life growing up. We lived, not too many people around here had jobs like when kids today get out of school, they either go on to further education, take jobs. Most of them work professionally, and you didn't have that back then. There was no a few jobs like banking and banks and stuff like that, but not much of anything else.
Depression years.
Hmm?
It was Depression years.
Yeah, really. We really have like so many people in this country were really affected by the Depression. We lived, it was a normal way of life for us. We lived very good, really. Plenty of food, and where a lot of people in the cities were starving and really hurting. We weren't that way. My folks, my mother and other relatives, you know how to make clothes, you make their own dresses. In fact, back in those days, a woman could take grain sacks from they got food for the animals in and make dresses. Very nice dresses, because the grain sacks were, back in those days, were attractive. You know, they weren't like a sack today. They have printed material and stuff. And actually, we lived very good. We go out and hunt, kill a deer in deer season in the fall, and go rabbit hunting, do rabbit. I don't know of anybody around now that eats rabbit. And it's one of the tastiest animals there are.
Always had chickens.
Huh?
Always had chickens.
Yeah. Chickens. I used to, when I was going to school, I used to trap a lot and skin the muskrats and raccoons and whatever else you got, and dry them, and usually a person come around and buy them from you, you know. So a lot of the women back then, in the 30s and so forth, the style was fur collars and coats, you know, so it was a good market for them. I used to get up when I was young in school, go down the stream in the spring through the summer, catch 4 or 5 barrels of herring, bring them up and put them in the cellar where it was cool. When I come home from school, I'd cut them out, cut the rows out. The herring rows and mackerel were a big item back then. You don't see anybody eating them today, and they're very tasty. And I'd take them to the fish market and they give me 50 cents a pot for them. I made a lot of money that I could use for school clothes.
You had said that you caught fish down at the herring run. How has the herring run changed over time?
Well, mainly there's hardly any herring anymore. The trawlers offshore, foreign trawlers, Japanese trawlers, and the big seine, the same amount, so there's not that many herring come into the herring, to tell you about the herring, they would come in the stream from the canal, go up the stream into the pond, which was herring pond, and they'd spawn, lay their eggs, they would hatch, in September or October, they would come back down the stream and go out to sea again. And it was a big thing. My father would, another thing about, he would make eel pots for eels and put them in herring pond and catch them, and he used to fill up barrels of eels and go down to the, there used to be a railroad station right in the canal, by the canal in Bourne, and ship them to New York and sell them. People in New York love those eels, yeah. And there's not too many, I don't know of anybody around here that eats eels anymore. Yeah.
So, just curious, did anybody from your family work on the bridges?
Yeah, my brother did, yeah.
That's my father.
Hmm?
My father,
Charlie worked on them too?
yeah.
I know my brother did. They used to, when they poured the cement, they didn't come in with cement mixers, portable cement mixers like they do today. It was all mixed on the site, the cement. I can remember my brother, I was small, coming home from work, and he'd be all, looked like a ghost, all covered with cement. In fact, he had a bald spot on his head, which was caused from carrying cement bags on his head. I just barely remember the old bridges there. There used to be a lift bridge. It would open up and let the traffic go across. When there was one of those boats coming, they'd open up and let the boats through. And
So, do you know if anybody got buried in the cement while the bridge construction was going on?
That was a rumor, I think. They had a rumor going around that somebody was buried in that. Yeah, I lived here, like I said, all my life, till I went into service. And then when I went into service, I went to I stopped at Japan. After the war was over, we stopped in Japan just for a short stay on the way to Korea. Times have changed.
So, is there anything that the both of you would like to say about the town, your culture, or how the town has changed?
I don't think. I think it's a very good town. Very, it's kept up to date on things. It's,
I think the main difference is just that there's a much larger population now than there was back when we were young. But I think the town growth has kept abreast it quite well.
still basically run the same way. They have their town meetings and town elections and some things you agree with and some you don't, but that's what makes it.
Could you talk a little bit about how you're related?
Related? His father was my brother, old brother, and he was the chief for a period of time. I don't know how many years. He was the chief of the Merick tribe.
So could you talk a little bit about the ferry that used to?
Oh, at the end of Herring Pond Road, you come to the Cape Cod Canal, which is the Cape Cod Canal today. But before it was widened and made into a big canal, there was a ferry station that took people, passengers, across from the north side of the canal to the south side, to Cape Cod. the actual Cape Cod. And it was manned by two men and oars. They had oars, and if you wanted to go across. But my father, when I was little, when he and my mother were first married, had to take that ferry. There was no stores on this side of the canal. And the only stores was in the village of Sandwich, which is how far Sandwich? Well, and they had to walk down there to get any provisions they needed, you know, like sugar or flour or canned staples or anything. So they had to, that was how they got across the canal.
Did you ever take the ferry?
No, it was before my time.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. What is your name?
Charles Harding Jr.
And where do you live?
But Johnny, unfortunately, he was on I don't remember which college he went to, but they were the #1 collegiate golf team in the nation his first 2 years there, and he was on their first team. Matter of fact, he went to school at the same time Jeff Lewis did. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff Lewis. Dr. Lewis's son he was a physician in Sandwich for years. But he became a professional golfer. Johnny, unfortunately, had always had epilepsy. And the night before he was ready to go back to start his junior year in college, he had a seizure. His sister was there to see him off, and she was a registered nurse, and she couldn't help him either. He passed away that night. I had seen him the night before that because we had won the Labor Day tournament, and I did, and they decided to pay us cash that year instead of trophies. So I had taken the cash down and I gave him the whole pot to go back to college with. And he was excited about that. His dad was thankful. But then the next night, as I said, he passed away with a seizure. It was a tragedy for the family because his other son, his oldest son, had died in an auto accident when he was a senior in high school. And they were all terrific golfers. They all belonged to the Pocasset Golf Club. I played several tournaments there with Johnny when he was working for me. Won them all but one, as a matter of fact.
So, what was all the struggle about with the tribe anyway?
It was to try to get, they were not a recognized Indian tribe, and that's what the court case was all about. They petitioned the Department of the Interior, which had control of Indian affairs, to become recognized. And they had prepared a case, and of course the state had lawyers against them, and that was tried in federal court. Well, the tribe eventually prevailed. They won the case and became a recognized Indian tribe.
So, what was your school experience like?
Probably the same as yours. I enjoyed it. Had a lot of friends.
How would you say that it has changed over time compared to how you went to school?
Well, when I went to high school, what's now the junior high used to be the high school. Later on, quite a bit later, they built a new school. It wasn't that much later because I hadn't been drafted yet. I was working for Wing Austin and Wing construction company over in Pocasset. And we did quite a bit of the land clearing for that new school. And it was loaded with boulders, huge boulders. There's one sticking out of the lawn in the front yard, you probably see it now. You only see the tip of it. That's about 90% underground. So they dug a huge hole, bulldozed it out, and then they rolled that stone into it. All the other stones we drilled and blasted to make jetty stones, haul them to different sites where they were building jetties.
So, what was the effect of the Depression on families in town?
Quite profound. As you're probably, maybe not, should be well aware, work was very scarce in those years. There were an awful lot of people that just had no work. My father was among them. My mother always worked. She was a cook. She worked, at that time, they had the old bridges then. They didn't have the new bridges built yet. And she worked, I don't even remember the name of the place. It was right off the south side of the Bourne Bridge. She worked there till they closed it. When they built the new bridge, they built the Howard Johnson's right at the end. You're probably familiar with that. And she went to work there as a short order cook for a number of years. She used to fill in part-time in nursing homes when the cooks there went on vacation. One down in Pocasset, another one over in Buzzards Bay, out on Lewis Point. So in fact, all of my daughters worked there part-time when they were going to high school, except my oldest daughter. She didn't. She worked in the goggle factory right there off the Rotary. I don't know if that's still there or not, or what they do there, if anything.
So, how would you say home life has changed since growing up in town?
Not much at all. It's pretty much the same then as it is now. Except there was a lot more management of children, because for the most part there was only one parent working at that time. As you're probably familiar, there aren't many families that have one person working anymore. So the children are left loose to run around. This neighborhood is good for that. You see the groups of teenagers roaming the streets at night. A couple of nights ago, about a week ago, they pulled all of those lights my neighbor had out in his lawn, and they're pretty well up there, and tossed them out of my lawn and in the driveway. Mischievous little things like that go on a lot. Most of the time, people don't bother to report them, unless it's something serious, of course. But when I went to school, drugs were not an issue. The only drugs that were available was alcohol, and there weren't many alcoholics in high school. So, but today, that's another story. They're very prevalent in all the high schools throughout the whole state, probably the whole country. It's a big problem.
Now, what was your connection with the forces and war?
Well, I worked for the Air Force at Otis for 7 years. Actually, almost 8. When I got laid off, it was in December. I think it was 75. And I took the family, because my oldest two were seniors in high school then. On their holiday vacation, I had them all take an extra week out of school because I took them all to Florida. I went to Disney World and quite a few other places there. They had filmed that first Tarzan film down there in Silver Springs in Florida. And when they completed their filming, they left 2 monkeys. And they multiplied. When we were down there in 75, there were hundreds of them. You'd see whole big groups of them in the trees.
Now, you had said that you were involved with the Korean War?
Yeah. Yeah, I was shipped over Well, I took my basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And when I completed basic training, I flew back, we were given a 30-day leave. And I got married to my first wife. This is my second wife. And she was the mother of our 6 children. But anyway, I had a pretty rough time in Korea. We were there, had sporadic skirmishes with the Chinese. As you're probably aware, the 38th parallel was a division line between the North and the South. It still is, but it was during the last couple of years of that Korean War. And I was there in the last year of it. In fact, they signed the ceasefire, I think it was 2 weeks before I left Korea. I got back home safely. And I got back in October, late October. And they had an early out program going at that time, 3-month early out. Actually, I got out almost 4 months early, because they were just trying to cut payroll down for the military. And I applied for enrollment at Wentworth Institute of Technology and got accepted for that fall. This was in the spring now. In the meantime, I was working back for Wing Austin Wing trucking. And that fall, I don't know if you remember, they had a hurricane. It really did a lot of damage along that shore over there. Washed out the railroad tracks and took several homes right out into the water. Washed out the dike to Mashpee Island. Totally annihilated it. So that took away their gas and electricity, which both went on that dike. So Otis was supplying them with these ducks they had, and bringing back pregnant women for the hospital and so on and so forth. And we had to haul fill around the clock for almost a week to rebuild that dike. I had a couple of bulldozers there bulldozing it out and dumping it as fast as they could bulldoze it out. And I rebuilt the dike and got gas and electricity out there sometime later. But that was my experience with that hurricane.
So do you know if Bourne played a part in the war?
If Bourne played a part, an awful lot of Bourne people were in the war. Yeah, they used to have a placard on the front of the town hall. I think it's down in the community building now. In fact, I think they've got it inside on one of the walls. And all the veterans from World War II and the Korean War and the Vietnam War now are all on those plaques on the wall. So if you go in the community building, you can see those. See the various people. In fact, my barber, the barber I go to up in Buzzards Bay, you know Addie? I don't know if you know him. Anyway, he was in World War II. I just missed World War II. My uncle was 4 years older than me. He got drafted in World War II, right out of high school. He never finished his senior year. My brother-in-law was in the same class he was. He got drafted at the same time. They both got their GEDs when they got out. So I'd say Bourne played a pretty good part in all the wars we've been involved in so far. My wife's youngest daughter was in Iraq. She's my stepdaughter. She went to college in Boston. In her senior year, after her junior year, she decided she wanted to do something to help pay for her education, so she joined the National Guard. This was before the Iraq War broke out. And she took her basic during the summer. You understand, she'd go back to finish her senior year, which she did. Then she got her whole National Guard outfit got nationalized and sucked into the Iraqi war. She was over there, her barracks was hit by a Scud missile. She was out on patrol at the time. When she got back off patrol, she had to go in and help get all the wounded and the deceased out of the area of the barracks that got hit and so forth. So that left an emotional scar on her.
Now, what businesses have come and gone in this area over time?
Well, they used to have the Coca-Cola bottling company right down here, right over the bridge in Sagamore. They wanted to relocate over off MacArthur Boulevard, and the town of Bourne selectmen said no. Why, God only knows. It's about the cleanest type of business you can find. So they went down to Sandwich. They're off Route 130 right now. Been there for years. That was a big, stab in your own back for the town of Bourne. That's a pretty dumb selectman at times. But, and they're a big taxpayer too.
So what was the religious aspect in town like for you back then?
Well, all through my childhood, I went to the little church you visited earlier on Herring Road. Sunday school every Sunday. We had a Sunday school teacher that came from somewhere up in Manamet. She was a very nice teacher. I believe her name was Doane, D-O-A-N-E. And on top of that, I usually stayed for church, because the church service followed the Sunday school every Sunday. So instead of walking home, it was quite a ways, I know where Warren lives from the church. We used to walk all the way from there up to the church every Sunday for Sunday school. Instead of walking home, I'd stay for church and ride home with my parents because they went to church. But we had always had a part-time minister. Because the church was small, and the church in Percasset was small. And they had the same pastor. They had a parish house over in Percasset where they housed the minister. Usually it was, not always, they had a young minister at one time. But the last minister I remember was a retired, semi-retired I should say, minister. He took those two small churches on. And he was very good. He was a doctor of genealogy. Had done a lot of studying. I used to have to call him up short on a lot of things. Susan said I shouldn't get into religious things, so I won't.
Could you talk a little bit about your jobs throughout your time in Bourne?
Well, like I said, my first job was with Wing Austin and Wing over in Percasset. They had formed a construction business. Not building. Mostly it was clearing land, digging cellar holes, building seawall jetties, seawalls, etc. A lot of trucking. Loam, delivered a lot of loam. They had a big loam field down there in Percasset. Well, they cultivated the loam. And they cleared a lot of land for individuals. In fact, most of what I did was for individuals. There were 3 developments that they were employed to clear, build roads, dig cellars, and whole 9 yards, for a gentleman named Earl Boardman. Don't know if you ever heard of him. He was the second highest taxpayer in Massachusetts, next to Old Man Kennedy. But they were both in bootlegging. Kennedy's would probably deny it, but Boardman says he was their biggest competitor. And Boardman made no bones about it. He still owned 7 breweries when we worked for him. And most of the lands that we developed for him were his bootlegging grounds. There was one up in just beyond Wareham, what's the next town. He owned a whole lot, quite a few acres of shoreland there. Had a huge home he had built. He built a lodge actually for a club he belonged to, a wealthy person's club. Had 19 bedrooms, all with private baths, a huge meeting hall, huge kitchen and all of that. And had a private runway there, because they used to come in by private aircraft. We developed that whole area for him, and digging up there, we kept getting all of these wires tangled up in the tracks of the bulldozers and the cranes as well. And he used to come around almost every day, see how things were going. And I remember by Landers, he was a crane operator, complained to him about all the wires. He said, oh, he said, that's all the communication wires we had. We had them just under the turf, so the feds couldn't find them. They had alarms all the way from up. If the feds came near, they just pressed a button, the alarm went off down on the shore. If they had boats coming in, they used to bring in the booze in burlap sacks. They would just drop those sacks overboard and, take a land bearing to where they dropped them over and go back dropping us and get most of them back later. But if they were on their way up with them and the alarm went off, they just peel up the turf and spread them out and cover them. He said, if you find any booze out there, and you probably find quite a few bottles, he says, that's good booze, don't throw it away. We did, we found a lot of bottles. Mostly Canadian whiskey and scotch and such. Because they, I guess, bootlegged a lot from Canada. Another place we developed for him was down in Picasset. Another place we developed for him was over in North Falmouth. So he had 3 big areas of shore lot we used to bring in as bootlegging. He developed them all into home lots, etc. In fact, through conversation, he found out Bylander's wife was his cousin, which By never knew. He told him what her maiden name was, and her parents would say, oh, I know them. Yeah, she's my cousin. He gave that family lavish gifts at Christmas time. I can remember By telling us about that.
So, you had talked a little bit about how the life of children in town has changed a lot. Where did the kids play back when you were a child?
Where did they play? Well, I lived in a rather isolated area down in Bournedale. It was more isolated then than it is now. As a matter of fact, I can remember laying in bed because we could see the headlights going down Egg Pond Road and counting the headlights, and until it got past 1. We would walk to school all the way down to the canal to catch the bus every day. Never passed a car coming or going. That's how little traffic there was in those days. So kids didn't have cars to run around with like they do now. When I was in high school, there were probably 3 kids whose parents had given them a car when they became a senior, old enough to get a driver's license. Some of them were driving their parents' cars around. I know I drove my mother's car a lot. But I know just a few years later, it was pretty common for half the school to have their own cars, drive to school. 2 of my daughters were driving to school at Bourne High. Bought their own cars from their own work study, working, saved their money. Didn't need it for anything else. The parents were taking care of them. But anyway, I think today cars are much more readily available to high school students and students of that age, kids of that age. They do a lot more running around. There's an awful lot more partying that goes on. And back when I was a kid, there was very little partying. Anything that was partying was probably half a dozen kids on a back road somewhere. That was about it. Most parents didn't allow that kind of thing in their homes. And it wasn't very often homes were vacant. I can remember my uncle, the house you were in earlier. His kids were all grown and out except the one who was still home. He was still going to high school. He was, one of the last jobs he had was for a firm that had a contract with the government of Israel, building an airfield and runways over in Israel. And he was over there for 3 years. It was a 3-year contract doing that. Had a very nice rate of pay. They have a very big tax break when they bring back their pay into the States, which most people don't get. But it paid off pretty good for him. But while he was gone, his oldest son, I think he had just graduated from high school, was there. And he had party after party. We used to hear him over there because I lived not too far from that. I could hear him. And when he came home, he was enraged. The house was a mess. He had several trash barrels full of empty beer cans. There were holes punched in the drywall and stuff like that. The house was a mess. They had to just about rebuild it. But that's kind of wild partying that kids can get into when there's no parents around. I don't think it was something that was an exception either. I think a lot of it went on around town, and all the towns around probably.
Is there anything else that about your history that you would like us to know?
I've been retired for the last few years since. Well, we were going to retire in Canada. I'm not going to tell you why we came back here. I told my wife I wouldn't. It involves personal things. But anyway, we had a house built, custom built for us up there. We owned 2 other homes up there before that. And then I sold my house in Bourne. We had a home custom built up in Canada. At that time it was cheaper to build a home in Canada. High quality workmanship. And a nice development they were just putting in up there. And we were there for a couple of years. Almost 3. I was there about 1 year by myself because my wife had to come back here for personal reasons that we won't go into. But anyway, I didn't like the medical system up there. And the delays and delays and delays to get treatment up there is horrendous. People die of cancer before they can get into a hospital because they can't take them. So we put the house on the market. It only took a month to sell it up there, too. It was brand new. No bartering, gave us what we asked. So we made a profit on that, too. Paid cash for this. But I was retired when we moved up there. Played a lot of golf.
What do you miss most in Bourne that is gone now?
What do I miss in Bourne? It's gone. I don't know. Everything I used to know is still there. The old town hall is still there. The old police station used to be under it. Now it's over on Main Street. That's new. New community building. There's been a lot of improvements. Of course, there wasn't any bypass. All the traffic came right through Main Street. When I put the bypass in, that's when all those businesses along there went out of business because they weren't getting it. They depended a lot on the traffic going through tourism. A lot of places still do where they have traffic going through them all down the campus like that. But I kind of miss all the business shops along there. I miss the old theater. I used to go to that quite a lot. I can remember when it was 10 cents to go to a matinee.
Thank you very much for
You're
your
welcome.
time. I have here today with me Mrs. Phyllis Ingersol at her family's property in Buzzards Bay on Head of the Bay Road. Now, Mrs. Ingersol, could you tell me a little bit about your family's history in town and on this property?
Well, it's a very, very long history. The first connection of the family to Buzzards Bay was when the Tudor family in 1880 approximately came to area near the mouth of the Manamet River, which now is on the canal. They had a summer place which was just property, and they would bring tents and put up a big tent for the dining room and living room, and then each little family unit had a tent. And we have this picture from that time, which is extremely interesting to see. They would build a platform for the tent, so it was quite a semi-permanent structure. I don't know whether it overwintered or how they did that, but it was quite common for families to put up these tents in various places around Buzzards Bay to just have a carefree summer away from the city and in the nice southwest breezes of Buzzards Bay. So one of the children of this family was Marie Tudor. She married someone from New York, but they came back to this area, and they got a place on Prudence Island, which is very, very isolated. Then the husband died, and she did not want to be so isolated on an island. So she said, well, I remember when I was little, we stayed at this really nice area where in the summer the breezes blew, and I wonder if I could find some property somewhere around there. So it just so happened that 3 old houses that had been the property of the Fisherman's Club were for sale just at the time she was looking for something. So she bought 3 properties, and we have a map that shows the 3 different houses. The houses were old, I mean, 1700, built in the 1700s, and so I'm sure she fixed them up in various ways, but not too much. She liked the fact that they were old houses and wanted to keep the character. But she was a very, very dynamic lady, as it turned out. First she wanted to, she believed that the farm was a great way of life for people, that they should have experience digging in the earth. And so she wanted her kids to grow up and with that experience. So of course they had farmers who actually did most of the work, but all the kids helped and learned about farming, and all became very interested in farming. So that has been in the family tradition for a long time. So her 4 boys and her daughter Hope all grew up in this house where we're sitting right now. But they also traveled in the winters, and at one point they went to England. So their idea of farming was not exactly nose to the grindstone every single day farming. It was sort of a philosophical farming. And at one point she said, well, the facilities around this house are not good. They're maybe 100 years old, the barn and the various building. So I wanted to build a new barn, a whole barn up across the street, across Bourne Road. So she hired Mr. Spleed, who was recently in the paper, having worked on the canal, he then worked on Marie Garland's Garland's property, and blasting the stones that were there and cutting down all the trees and making 60 acres of fields and 5 or 6 large farm buildings, which it turns out are model farm buildings, special building design for the cows, special for the horses, special for the pigs, long, narrow for the chickens and the sheep. So it was kind of a model farm, and I've seen articles from old magazines that show these were the best way to build a barn for the cattle is this. So we had this model farm here, and I didn't even realize it until I started looking into some of the history of how it got built and where she would have gotten the ideas of how to build these different types of buildings. But all the center was the farm, and around were all the fields, which used to be used for hay fields, and now we don't make hay in this area of Massachusetts anymore. We use it mostly for pasture, but those buildings are still being used. Then the next project that she started was for the town of Bourne, the Old Colony Union. And this was a idealistic center for women to come together and learn skills that they could do at home, like embroidery and cooking and all these things. And this union building would be where they could sell their goods, and then they could get a little bit of extra money, because money was very, very hard to come by in those days. And it mostly went to the men, so she was trying to provide a way for wives and mothers to earn something special for things that they thought were important. And that was started in 2011. We have some very interesting notes about the beginnings of it. They were so idealistic and wanted everyone to come together and be sociable and work together. And it was quite successful, and I think it's continued to be a women's club, and it's lost its sort of socialistic aspect of the industrial, what she called industrial, is really home working aspect. And then, well, I think World War I came along, and I think it distracted people from that club. And I think it changed its character after that. Then the next project, she always had to have projects, because she had money enough to support these ideas that she had. The next was an artist colony, which was basically centered on this building, and she built some little prefabricated buildings around the property, and then that people would come together in the evenings and eat in the big dining room, and then go off and do their art, whatever it was, writing, poetry, painting, of course, and artwork. So, and that went on for several years in the summers. So she was a busy lady, and but soon after that, she decided to move out of Buzzards Bay and move to New Mexico, where there was a definite collection of artists down there, and she wanted to be part of that. But in the meantime, her daughter Hope had grown up here and loved this place very much. She married and had kids and tried living in New York City and was very, very unhappy.
Yeah.
And her husband gave up his career in finance to come back and live here with her, I mean, helping her run the farm. But he had very different ideas from her on how the farm should be run. So eventually that marriage broke up and she stayed here at the farm. As she stayed here longer, she became more and more interested in Welsh ponies, raising Welsh ponies and breeding them, which at one time she had 50, which is a lot of ponies. And the ones that were very good, she wanted to keep, of course. The ones that were bad, or if some didn't come out quite so well, she didn't want to sell them because then she'd have a reputation for bad selling that. So that was a recipe for keeping all the ponies on this place. So it was a very important place for the Welsh Pony Society and for those people. She would go to shows and nearly always get first prizes. So people didn't like her to come because they would like to share in some of the first prizes. But then history sort of crept up on her, and it was time to build Route 25 from New York to the Cape. And this was the direct line for that route. At first it was going to come right through this house and go to the bridge. But she battled that idea, and then they said, well, they would go a little bit around the house, but through the farm fields. And then at that point, my husband and I came back from living abroad, and we decided to help her to get the road put even further around the property. It would still be on our land, but it would be outside the open fields. It would be in the woods, not in the open fields, so it wouldn't be such a bad influence on the property. So we worked for about 5 years or 8 years or something.
Wow.
Hired lawyers. But in the meantime, what had happened was the conservation movement in the United States had developed, and there was a law, Wetlands Protection Act. And it turned out that there were wetlands, that this route that the DPW had proposed went through wetlands, and that was illegal if there was an alternative. So we presented an alternative, which was not in the wetlands, but in the uplands is what they call it, not highlands. That's so we were lucky to be coming along at the same time as the conservation movement, and we could use that law to protect the property. So in the end, the highway went around it. So if you look on the map, you see a big hump, and that's the center of that is our property. We were also in a good location for the Buzzards Bay Water District to buy sites for wells for the town. So we also sold, well, Hope sold land to the water district, and also there were electric power lines coming through. So this place, it turned out, was quite a sort of center for all these different things, which was not exactly our idea of a peaceful farm. But at one point my husband said to Hope, you sure you don't wanna just sell this and go to Maine where there are not all these things happening?
Yeah.
And she said, no, I wanna stay here.
Yeah.
So, we did, so we were able to win the case with the highway and get, we had to sue the water district to get money for the land that they took from us for their third well site. So, as a big landowner, you have all these forces that are
Yeah.
coming at you,
Yeah, it definitely
and you don't
seems like it.
necessarily choose them. The Hope's idea was to keep the land open, not have development, and not keep it as a wildlife area. So there were two things that helped us keep this land in open space. One is the wildlands trusts. Land trusts were formed that would receive the land. The owner would give land to the trust, and they would get a tax deduction for the gift, and the trust would hold the land in perpetuity, and it wouldn't be allowed to be developed. So we made a relationship with a land trust in Plymouth, and they received 115 acres of what had formerly been cranberry bogs, and then there were other laws in which you could give the development rights to the land. You would still own the land, but you wouldn't be allowed to develop it. Those two laws helped us to give a lot of land away and benefit slightly from it. And we were then, recently, we were able to actually sell land to the town under the Community Preservation Act, which allowed us to actually get full and fair market value for the land. So we're now very, very pleased at the amount of open space that surrounds this farm. And Hope Ingersol's dream will be very, we're very pleased at how much open space there is, and she'd be very happy with that. The next generation, our son lives here and has an organic garden, and many people stop in Bourne and buy produce there. And Mrs. Ingersol was one of the early people who understood organics, and she was influenced by Rachel Carson, The Silent Spring, and she had organic cranberries very early, even in the 50s, which is quite amazing. So she would also be pleased to see that her grandson is now growing organic vegetables. But I mean, it's not only him, the whole world has come along to understand these things, but she was definitely a pioneer, and her grandson was just following in her footsteps that way and carrying on, doing a good job carrying on her ideas. So that's more or less where we are today. So from 1880 to 2014.
Wow.
It's quite a long and
Large
interesting
history,
history.
yeah. Now, you had mentioned there was fishermen clubs
Oh, yeah.
way back when. Could you talk a little bit about those?
Well, when Marie Tudor Garland came to the area, she found these 3 old houses which had been a fisherman's club. And those were something that just, I don't know, lasted maybe 20 years at the end of the century and the beginning of the 1900s, where the house would be a clubhouse. Different men from Boston would rent different rooms, and then they would come down here, and then they would all go off fishing. The main thing that they fished in those days were salters, which used to run up the rivers and up into the ponds the way the herring do now. But when the canal was built, I mean, it started, I'm not actually clear when the actual construction started, messing the place up very badly as far as environmentally.
Mm.
But it was certainly around 1900, I think, because it wasn't finished until 1914, but the whole process was very long. And so those fish ceased to exist, and the fishing club then ceased to exist. So this, it's fun to think about this house being used as a fisherman's club. Because the actual rooms are quite similar to what they were at that time, but you now have bathrooms, which is nice. And a few changes, but not many changes.
Now, you had said there was some ice
Oh, yeah.
gathering on the property.
Oh, yes. We have pictures of ice making on the ponds here. There are 3 ponds, but mainly there was 1 pond, and it was quite common around the turn of the century to cut ice in the winter and stack it in special houses and pack around sawdust. And that would last right through the winter. That was very common in New England, and I've seen other ones and other ice houses in other places. We still have the ice house, the original ice house, is now turned into well, actually it's a year-round house, but one big room and a little extra room, sort of balcony rooms. And that actually was connected to another family. Our grandfather, Hope's grandfather, was Frederick Tudor, the Ice King, and many people have heard of him. But he didn't actually work in this area. But his technique of saving the ice and packing it with sawdust was taken from his idea.
So you had mentioned a little bit about how this property has changed hands a lot, and how there's also other farms in the area on this property. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know what you mean by changing hands. That within the family, different people took responsibility at different times. And I really don't know. In the 1900s, there were many farms in the area, and most of them had sheep running over the land, and that kept all the trees down, so there were practically no trees on the Cape in those days. But now, of course, we don't have all these animals keeping things down, so we have a lot more forest. And the thing that's cutting the forest is the development, of course, now. But yeah, this used to be an area that sent vegetables, this whole, I think, vegetables up to Boston for market. In those days. And also wood. Wood was cut on the areas that did have wood, where wood is allowed to grow, they did have wood lots, where they cut the wood for fire or for lumber, and then would send them on boats to either Boston or Providence or New York. And that was, they would come in at the bay and put the boats, Buzzards Bay is very shallow, so they would let the boats touch bottom and then load them up. And then when the water came along, they would go out. We have pictures of that too. It's very cool. Some of these things that we can't have changed so much the way we do things. It's fun to have the pictures of it.
Yeah. Now there's the two farms that are separate now. I know there's the one across the street and there's the one over there.
Well then,
on that
what
side.
what Marie built for the new farm, the model farm, we sold to another, because we did not want to keep the horse activity. Nobody was that interested that they wanted to devote themselves to that. So we sold it to a young couple who are very interested in and have done a very good job in promoting the horse business, and they have their annual great big show right now. You can hear the loudspeakers talking, shouting at the people.
Yeah.
So they've done a very good job, and we've been able to use that money to help maintain the property on this side.
So what was the reasoning behind the idea of the windmills?
Oh, I see. Well, around 2004 or 5, it seemed to be in the air that alternative forms of energy were going to be needed, and we had property and land, and we thought, well, why not put windmills up, wind turbines, that's what the proper name, wind turbines up on this open space, which is not near where people live, and then we can, that would be an investment for the family, but also a good thing as far as the whole community goes. The town was in favor of it, the state was in favor of it, the Cape Cod Commission said they were in favor of it, and the federal government was supporting. So all those governmental agencies, so we thought, okay, this is gonna work, we're gonna have to make careful plans, and there will be a process to get permission, but probably this will work. But it didn't. The Cape Cod Commission came down by 1 or 2 votes against us, and that stopped our future progress. And no other wind turbines have been built since then. It's just was too much of a fight, and not just, they were not, the people have not decided that it's important to have alternative energy. So that was a big disappointment for us. But we're going on, and right now my husband is working on the Hoxie School, which is a school that was closed down in 1990, I think, more or less, I'm not sure, maybe 2000. But it's a wonderful building, and future, some young folks have decided to try to make it into an art and recreation center.
Mm.
So that's a wonderful project that we're trying to help in any way we can with that. So there's always something interesting to do around Buzzards Bay.
Oh, yes.
All right,
Now, what part do you feel you have had in guaranteeing this farm's future success and preservation?
well, since Jerry and I started to work, we weren't always living here, but to pay attention to this farm. As I've said, many laws came into effect that helped us to preserve the land permanently. And we have kept some land in our own ownership so that at some point, if the family needs to sell land, there can be certain areas set aside for that. But we designed the shape so that it would be just something like a cul-de-sac coming in with a few lots around it and still keeping most of the space open. So yeah, we were extremely active over the last 30 years in taking advantage of all the things we could to save this property and also to encourage other people in the neighborhood to give land away. Just recently, the town of Bourne bought a property that used to be in the family long ago. And I heard that the town was interested in buying, and I heard that this member of the family, distant member, was willing to sell, so actually got them together. And the town bought the property just at the last town meeting, so it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing what you can do. We have a big green swath in this area, mostly because of the family activities in trying to get conservation. So.
Now, is there anything else that you would like us to know about the family and the property and plans for the future?
Oh, plans for the future. Well, the plans for the future are to keep it as open space. We have a family organization and trust, and the governance of that organization is passing on to our children, and hopefully pass on to their children. But the farm has turned into, instead of being something that would require input of money from a trust or something, it is now self-supporting because we have houses which we rent and various other things that we do. We have a radio tower that brings in money. So we are able to support ourselves, and that means that the individual members of the family don't have to kick in a lot of money every year. They don't get much, but they don't kick in either. So we try to make it a self-supporting thing, but organization. But it means you have to pay attention all the time to see what's going on and what other opportunities are out there, or what are the dangers that are out there. So it's a full-time job, really, to do. Then we have to talk to young people who want to know about the history of it.
Keeping it alive.
Yeah. Well, anything else? I think that's a good ending.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Good. Well, have to shake your hands.